The banquet hall shimmered with golden light, the air filled with hushed conversations and the clinking of crystal glasses. It was meant to be a night of pride for Alina, who stood gracefully at her husband's side, her hand resting gently on her swollen belly. But that night, in front of the most powerful figures in the city, her world shattered. Dorian, tall and charming, leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at his lips. With a careless laugh, he gestured toward his wife's glowing figure and made a cruel remark about her body. The sound of his words cut sharper than glass. At first, a few chuckles broke the silence, then uneasy laughter spread among the guests. Alina froze, her eyes wide, her heart pounding in her chest. She had given him her trust, her body, her very soul, and now the man she loved mocked her most vulnerable moment. Heat rose to her cheeks as whispers swirled through the room. Her smile trembled, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her dress. She excused herself quietly, tears threatening to break free as she hurried out of sight. The music continued, but the atmosphere had changed. At the head table, her father, Mr. Calder, remained still. His eyes followed his daughter's departure, his expression unreadable. But deep within, a decision began to take shape. There is a special kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from strangers or enemies. It comes from the one you trust most. To stand in a room full of people and feel your partner's laughter slice through you, that is a wound far deeper than silence could ever be. Alina had carried his child with joy. She had endured sleepless nights and tender aches with devotion. Yet in that instant her sacrifice was mocked, her beauty belittled, her love trampled beneath careless words. The sparkle of chandeliers above blurred as her vision clouded, every whisper in the hall echoing like judgment against her. Some guests looked away uncomfortably, others forced nervous smiles. No one stepped in. To them it was a fleeting jest, but to her it was betrayal made public. At the head table, Mr. Calder's gaze never wavered. His hand rested firmly on his glass, but his eyes spoke of storms waiting in silence. He had trusted this man with his daughter's happiness. Now he measured the depth of that mistake. Dorian smirked, confident the night would pass without consequence. He couldn't know that a single jest had already begun the slow collapse of everything he was chasing. Dorian thought his remark was harmless, a laugh to amuse powerful men, a careless joke to elevate his own pride. But what he failed to see was that words spoken in cruelty are seeds that always bear fruit. That night, he planted the beginning of his own downfall, because when a husband wounds his wife, he does not only break her spirit, he dishonors the very promise that bound them. And when that wife is the treasured daughter of a man whose influence stretches into every corner of the business world, the consequences are far-reaching. Alina's footsteps faded into the distance, her tears hidden from the crowd, but not from the eyes of her father. Mr. Calder remained silent, his expression composed, but his silence carried more weight than any outburst ever could. For beneath that calm exterior lay a resolve. No one humiliates his daughter without paying a price. Yet before pride, betrayal, and ruin, there had been something else: love. A bond so deep that even now, beneath all the pain, it still lingered like an echo. To understand the weight of that night, we must first return to where it all began. To the days when Alina and Dorian's hearts beat as one, and love was their only wealth, long before the glittering banquet halls and the sharp sting of humiliation. There was a time when Alina and Dorian's world was tender, quiet, and full of promise. They had met in the most unassuming way, a chance encounter at a bookstore, both reaching for the same worn copy of a classic novel. Their hands brushed, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Alina, shy but warm, offered it to him with a smile. That single moment became the spark that grew into something unforgettable. Dorian returned the book to the shelf and insisted she take it, claiming he could not possibly keep it after seeing her eyes light up at the pages. Alina laughed softly, and in that laugh, Dorian felt a pull stronger than ambition or pride. Their conversations began as small exchanges, about books, about dreams, about life's uncertainties. But with each meeting, those exchanges grew deeper. Dorian, who often masked his insecurities behind charm, found himself speaking honestly with her. And Alina, who had known luxury but carried no arrogance, found comfort in his raw ambition and determination. In the glow of those early days, love wasn't complicated. It was in the way he walked her home under starlit skies, in the way she listened as though his voice was the only sound that mattered. Together, they discovered that the simplest moments could feel eternal. Their love deepened quietly, not in grand gestures, but in the way nights stretched into dawn without them noticing. They would sit on the floor of Dorian's modest apartment, sipping tea from mismatched cups, speaking of futures they hadn't yet shaped. Alina spoke of wanting a home filled with warmth, laughter, and children's voices. Dorian dreamed of building something lasting with his own hands, a life not defined by where he came from, but by what he achieved. In those hours, ambition and tenderness blended, his hunger for success softened by her gentleness, her hopes anchored by his determination. One evening, long before wedding vows, Alina surprised him. When he opened the door, the tiny apartment was transformed. The lights were dim, the table draped in a cloth, candles flickering softly, casting a golden glow across the room. A simple meal was waiting, but it wasn't the food that stole his breath. It was her, standing there with nervous eyes, hoping he would understand the depth of what she was offering. They ate slowly, laughing, whispering promises that felt sacred in the hush of that night. Every touch of her hand, every glance of her eyes carried weight. When they finally leaned into each other, the kisses were not hurried but reverent, as though they were memorizing a moment they never wanted to forget. That night lingered in both their hearts, like a secret they carried together. After dinner, they moved slowly, as if every second deserved to be cherished. Dorian reached across the table, brushing her fingers with his, and Alina rose, letting him draw her into his arms. There were no grand declarations, only quiet breaths and soft gazes. They kissed gently at first, then with growing certainty, as though the world outside that room had ceased to exist. The candlelight flickered against their skin as they made love tenderly, every touch deliberate, every embrace carrying unspoken vows. It was not lust that defined them that evening, but devotion, two souls binding themselves with promises deeper than words could ever reach. When it was over, they lay close, Alina's head resting on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. Dorian whispered that he would always protect her, that no matter what life demanded, she would never face it alone. She smiled in the dim light, trusting every word. In those early days, love was their truest wealth. Before pride, before ambition, before cruelty, they had built something rare and beautiful, a bond that should have been unbreakable. Have you ever witnessed how love can change over time, for better or for worse? Share your thoughts below because your voice matters here. When Alina discovered she was expecting, her heart overflowed with a joy she had never known. She held the news close for a day, savoring it, before finally surprising Dorian with trembling hands and tearful eyes. She expected him to lift her into his arms, to share in the miracle that was now theirs. For Alina, the pregnancy was not just the beginning of motherhood, it was the deepening of their love story. She imagined Dorian resting his ear against her belly, whispering to their child, making her laugh during long nights of discomfort. She believed this would be the chapter that united them even more. But Dorian's reaction was muted. At first, he forced a smile, congratulating her without warmth. Inside, he wrestled with resentment he never voiced aloud. The idea of becoming a father filled him with unease. He had wanted to climb higher, to build his empire, to prove himself, and now he felt chained, his ambitions interrupted by a responsibility he hadn't asked for so soon. Alina noticed the hesitation in his embrace, the way his kisses grew shorter, less intentional. She brushed it off as stress, convincing herself that once the news settled, he would become the husband she dreamed he'd be during this new journey. As her belly grew, Alina's glow only deepened. She would stand in front of the mirror, smiling softly as she traced gentle circles over her skin, whispering promises to the child she already loved with her whole heart. In those quiet moments, she believed this child was the greatest blessing she and Dorian could ever share. But for Dorian, the blessing became something else entirely. His pride, once charmed by Alina's devotion, began to twist. At dinners with friends, when Alina struggled to sit comfortably, he would smirk and say, "She's already acting like a queen who needs servants." Laughter followed, but Alina's cheeks burned as her dignity was stripped away one careless remark at a time. Even in public, he treated her cravings as a spectacle. When she asked for something sweet late at night, he joked loudly that she was eating for three. Each word seemed harmless to him, but to her it was a knife. A reminder that the man who once worshipped her now treated her body as a joke. She forgave him in silence, convincing herself it was stress, that the man she had loved so tenderly was still there beneath the sharp edges. But deep inside, cracks had begun to form. Alina's days became a quiet battle. She carried life within her, yet felt more alone than ever before. At night she would reach for Dorian, hoping for comfort, but too often his side of the bed was cold, his focus claimed by late meetings and whispered phone calls. When he was home, his words lacked tenderness. Instead of rubbing her back when she felt tired, he reminded her of the money he needed to earn. Instead of telling her she was beautiful, he pointed out how her dresses no longer fit. To Dorian, every change in her body was something to joke about. To Alina, each jest was another reminder that the man she adored was slipping further away. Still, she loved him. She told herself that love required patience, that marriage meant standing by each other through seasons of hardship. She placed her hand on her stomach, speaking softly to the child within, assuring her baby that everything would be all right. In truth, her voice wavered. She wanted to believe her words, but in her heart she knew something precious was fading. Not her love for the child, but the connection to the man who should have cherished them both. Mr. Calder was a man whose very name carried weight. In the corporate world, boardrooms hushed when he entered. Competitors adjusted strategies at the mention of his signature. He'd built empires, destroyed rivals, and carved his influence into industries that feared his hand. To strangers, he was a figure of power and calculation. But to Alina, he was simply Papa. To her, he was the man who used to kneel by her bed to tell stories when she was a child, who brushed her tears away with a thumb whenever life felt unfair. Though he had wealth that could buy anything, his greatest treasure was always his daughter's happiness. So when he began to notice the change in her, the redness in her eyes, the strained smile she forced in public, the way her laughter came less often, his heart tightened. Calder had never been a man to interfere lightly in her choices. He had respected her when she insisted on marrying Dorian, even though Calder had his doubts about the young man's pride. He had told himself that love was hers to choose, that she must find her own way. Now, however, he watched carefully. His silence was not indifference, but a deliberate pause, a test, both for Dorian and for himself. Calder observed more than he spoke. In business, this habit made him dangerous. He listened while others revealed themselves. At home, that same silence now weighed on him as he watched his daughter drift through the house with tired eyes. He noticed the way Alina touched her belly with tenderness, yet her smile rarely reached her eyes. He noticed how quickly she excused Dorian's careless remarks, how she defended him even when the pain was obvious in her voice. She was protecting her husband's pride, while he was slowly stripping hers away. A father's instinct is to shield his child from harm, yet Calder fought against that impulse. He told himself that marriage required space, that perhaps Dorian needed time to grow into the role he had chosen. But every night that he heard Alina crying softly in her room, his patience thinned. Every time he saw her shrink in public while Dorian laughed, a fire stirred within him. Calder's world had always been one of consequences. He had taught ruthless men lessons they never forgot. Yet this was no rival across a boardroom table. This was his daughter's husband. That made the test harder, but his resolve clearer. In his heart he made a quiet vow. He would give Dorian enough rope to prove himself. But if that rope was used to wound Alina further, Calder would not hesitate to tighten it. The evening shimmered with wealth and power. The corporate dinner was held in a grand hall where chandeliers glowed above polished tables dressed with crystal and silver. Conversations flowed easily among the city's elite, investors, partners, and dignitaries whose opinions could make or break fortunes. At the center table sat Dorian, Alina, and Mr. Calder. For Dorian, this was more than an evening of business. It was a chance to bask in the glow of importance, to be seen as part of the Calder world. He wore confidence like a cloak, his smile wide, his laughter loud. Alina, by contrast, carried herself with quiet grace. Her pregnancy was visible now, her hand often resting on her belly as though protecting the life within. She wore a soft dress that flowed gently over her figure, her cheeks glowing with the warmth of motherhood. Though nervous, she was proud to stand at her husband's side. But beneath the laughter and chatter of the evening, tension brewed within Dorian. Every time a guest complimented Alina's radiance, he felt his pride shrinking. To him, their admiration wasn't for him. It was another reminder that she belonged to a world he could never truly own. As glasses clinked and speeches began, Dorian leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at his lips. He was about to make a mistake that would change everything. The room had fallen into a lull after the speeches, a quiet moment between courses when conversation softened and glasses refilled. It was in this pause that Dorian struck. With his arm resting casually on the back of Alina's chair, He spoke just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Well," he said with a laugh, tilting his glass toward her, "at least she doesn't need a cushion anymore. She brings her own everywhere she goes." For a second, the words hung in the air like smoke. Then came a ripple of uneasy laughter, some guests chuckling nervously, others glancing away as though pretending not to hear. A few exchanged looks of pity, their eyes drifting toward Alina. Her heart stopped. The color drained from her face, her lips trembled, and she lowered her gaze to the tablecloth. Inside, it felt as though the ground had given way. She had endured his teasing before, but never like this, never before a crowd, never when she was already so vulnerable. Tears welled quickly, and she could no longer stay. With a quiet apology to the table, her voice breaking, Alina rose from her seat and walked swiftly toward the exit. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing her humiliation as whispers filled the hall behind her. All eyes shifted to Mr. Calder. He hadn't moved when Alina left the table. He didn't speak. He simply sat still, his hand tightening slightly around the stem of his glass. To the guests, it was nothing, the composure of a man too seasoned to reveal discomfort, but those who knew him well noticed the sharp stillness in his gaze, the kind of silence that always came before decisive action. Calder's eyes never left Dorian. The young man chuckled, attempting to wave off the awkwardness as though nothing had happened. But Calder saw more than the smile. He saw arrogance where there should have been love, pride where there should have been humility, and worse, he saw his daughter's tears still glistening in the memory of the room. He had given Dorian the space to prove himself, the rope to build or to hang by. Tonight the choice had been made. Calder did not raise his voice, nor did he confront him in front of the guests. Instead, he leaned back, sipped his drink, and allowed the night to continue. But in his heart, he made a vow. The man who had dared to humiliate his daughter would learn that every choice carries a cost. Do you think mocking a partner in public is ever forgivable? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The dinner passed, but the consequences lingered in silence. Mr. Calder made no outburst, issued no warning. Yet within days the ripples of his decision began to spread. Calls were made quietly, deals that seemed solid began to shake. Partners who once pursued Dorian with eagerness suddenly grew hesitant. Meetings were rescheduled, then canceled altogether. Proposals that had been on the brink of approval were left unsigned, returned with polite but firm refusals. At first, Dorian brushed it off as coincidence. He told himself it was the natural rhythm of business, that markets shifted and partners hesitated. But the pattern grew too sharp to ignore. The banks that had once offered him generous lines of credit suddenly tightened their grip. One morning, a loan application he expected to sail through was rejected without explanation. A potential investor who had promised support withdrew, citing unfavorable conditions. Dorian paced his office, confusion etched into his face. He couldn't understand why doors that had been open yesterday now slammed shut. His secretary began delivering messages of declined calls, associates who once sought his attention now unavailable. The empire he imagined building seemed to be slipping through his fingers, piece by piece. Within weeks, the weight of decline pressed harder. Notices began to arrive, polite letters at first, then more urgent demands. Payments on his office lease were overdue. Suppliers, once eager to extend him credit, refused to deliver without full payment in advance. Even his staff, once loyal and attentive, grew anxious as salaries arrived late. At home, the pressure was no less suffocating. Alina noticed the growing stack of unopened envelopes on his desk, the tension in his jaw whenever the phone rang. Luxury that once seemed permanent began to slip away. A private club revoked his membership without explanation. The dealership that had offered him a new car on favorable terms suddenly withdrew the deal. Even the family's favorite restaurant declined his reservation. Dorian couldn't comprehend it. He had been on the rise, every step taking him closer to the stature he craved. Now, everything was collapsing at once, as if unseen hands were pushing him toward ruin. He snapped at Alina in his frustration, insisting it was temporary, yet even he no longer believed his words. Each morning, he rose hoping for relief. Each evening, he lay awake staring into the dark, wondering why every door closed no matter how hard he knocked. By the third month, Dorian's collapse was no longer subtle, it was absolute. Each day, his phone sat silent, no longer buzzing with opportunities. When he called former partners, secretaries answered with practiced apologies. He's unavailable at the moment. Messages went unreturned. Promises vanished into thin air. The weight of debt grew unbearable. Bills piled across his desk, unopened, their red stamps bleeding through the envelopes. Creditors left stern voicemails demanding payment. The bank that once invited him to private luncheons now declined even to meet with him. His accounts, once flush with borrowed confidence, thinned into desperation. At home, the shift was humiliating. The tailored suits he once wore to impress sat untouched while he recycled the same clothes, unwilling to admit he could no longer afford more. The cars he boasted about were quietly sold, one after the other, until only a modest vehicle remained. Still, Dorian clung to denial. He told himself this was a rough patch that luck would turn. But deep within, fear gnawed. Something unseen was at work, and it terrified him. What he didn't know was that every locked door, every closed deal, every rejection traced back to one man's silent hand, Mr. Calder, who had begun delivering justice without a single word spoken. Dorian sat alone in his study one night, the dim lamp casting shadows across the mountain of unpaid bills. The silence was deafening. No calls, no meetings, no promises of deals to come. For the first time, he faced the truth he had fought to deny. He had nothing left. His mind wandered to the vows he had once spoken, to the promises he whispered when Alina lay in his arms after their candlelit dinner so many years ago. He remembered the way her eyes had glowed in the flicker of those flames, the way she had trusted him completely when she placed her future in his hands. And now, what had he given her in return? Cruel laughter, empty pride, loneliness, the weight of his failure, pressed harder than the debt collectors at his door. For all his ambition, he had managed only to wound the woman who had loved him most, and yet Alina had not abandoned him. Though her eyes carried quiet pain, she still brought him meals when he forgot to eat. She still asked about his health when he snapped at her in frustration. One evening, when she found him staring at the floor, broken, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and whispered, "We will endure this together." Her words were not loud, but they pierced deeper than any lecture could. In that moment, he saw the truth. Her strength had always been greater than his pride. The turning point came quietly. No sudden revelation, no dramatic outburst, only a man, stripped of pride, finally choosing to see what had been in front of him all along. Dorian began with small gestures. One evening, when Alina struggled to lower herself into a chair, he rushed to her side, steadying her gently, without a word. Another night, when she woke restless, he sat with her until she fell asleep again, his hand resting protectively over hers. These moments were not grand or theatrical, but they were real. He started speaking to the child growing inside her, pressing his ear to her belly and whispering promises that this time carried weight. He apologized, not with speeches, but with presence, listening when she spoke, comforting her when she winced in pain, remembering the love they had once shared. Alina noticed the difference. Her heart had been bruised, but she saw his sincerity in the way he lingered beside her, in the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. She allowed herself to hope again, though cautiously, knowing that true change takes time. And in the shadows, Mr. Calder watched. He did not intervene, but he observed each step, weighing Dorian's actions against his past arrogance. The man who once mocked his daughter was now learning humility in silence, and Calder knew this test would reveal whether redemption was genuine or fleeting. For the first time in a long while, Dorian felt peace not from wealth, but from holding Alina's hand as if it were the most precious treasure he had ever possessed. If you believe in second chances, hit the like button, and let us know in the comments how forgiveness has shaped your life. The night arrived sooner than they expected. Alina clutched her stomach as the first wave of pain surged through her body, her face tightening as she called out for Dorian. Panic flickered in his eyes, but he steadied himself, rushing to her side. At the hospital, the sterile brightness and hurried footsteps surrounded them, yet in Dorian's mind there was only Alina. He held her trembling hand, pressing it firmly to his lips as sweat trickled down his own forehead. "I'm here," he whispered, voice breaking. "I won't leave you. Not this time. Not ever." Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Alina's cries of pain tore at him, each sound striking deeper than any insult or failure he had endured in business. He wiped her brow with trembling hands, murmured encouragement through clenched teeth, and whispered to their unborn child as if the baby could already hear him. "Come safely. Your mother is the bravest woman I've ever known." At one point, when Alina's strength faltered, she turned to him with tearful eyes. Dorian's own tears spilled freely as he begged her to hold on, promising that their story would not end in sorrow, but in a new beginning. For the first time, his words matched his heart completely. When the cry of their newborn finally filled the room, Dorian broke. He wept openly, clutching Alina's hand to his chest, whispering again and again that he would never fail her, never mock her, never take her love for granted again. From the corner of the room, Mr. Calders stood quietly, his presence steady though he had said little throughout the long night. He had seen countless men beg for mercy in boardrooms, but never had he seen Dorian so stripped of pride, clinging not to wealth or power, but to love. As the nurse placed the child in Alina's arms, Dorian leaned close, his forehead pressed to hers, his tears falling freely. "You are everything," he whispered, voice shaking. "You and this child. I will spend every day proving worthy of you." Calder's eyes softened, though his expression remained firm. Later, when the chaos of the delivery had quieted, he stepped forward. His voice was calm but carried the weight of a man who did not waste words. "You have failed her before," he said, meeting Dorian's gaze, "and I will not forgive easily, but I have seen what you are capable of when stripped of arrogance. If you remain this man, humble, devoted, steady, you may yet deserve her." Dorian bowed his head, not in shame this time, but in acknowledgement. "I understand," he said. The room grew still, the newborn's soft cries filling the silence. Calder looked down at his grandson and then back at his son-in-law. Success without love is emptiness. Pride destroys, but humility rebuilds. Strength is not in mocking weakness, it is in protecting it. For the first time, Calder laid a hand on Dorian's shoulder. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. In the end, Dorian's journey was not defined by the wealth he chased, nor the deals he once bragged about. His true measure was revealed in the quiet moments when his pride was broken and his heart finally understood what mattered most. He had mocked the woman who carried his child, treating her tenderness as weakness. In doing so, he lost everything: business partners, opportunities, the very respect he longed for. Yet it was in that loss that he discovered a truth far greater than success. Alina had never asked for riches or recognition. All she ever wanted was his love, his kindness, his presence. And when Dorian finally saw her through the lens of humility, he realized that her compassion had been his salvation all along. She had remained gentle even when he was cruel. She had stayed loyal even when he faltered. Through her, he learned that respect and love will always outweigh pride and arrogance. Mr. Calder's silent hand had stripped him of illusions, but it was Alina's quiet strength that rebuilt him. The man who once laughed at his wife's sacrifice became the man who held her hand in the throes of labor, whispering encouragement until their child's first cry filled the room. That transformation was the true victory. This story reminds us that success is hollow without love. Pride destroys while humility restores, and the greatest strength a man can show is not in belittling, but in cherishing. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs this reminder. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire.